Hey everybody. This video is going to be obviously about scientific writing again. This is about APA formatting. This video is going to have kind of a mix of some instruction and activities. So it's going to be like giving some examples and pointing out what's wrong with them. So you might find it very useful to pause this video when I give you a prompt, like a particular resource or sorry, reference in APA format or not, and then kind of see if you can fix it, and then I will kind of tell you the answers. So um, recall from the last time we talked about scientific writing and APA formatting that the writing that you're doing in this class is bound by these three different sources: the content, the ideas that you're coming up with, the style, the tone and kind of word choice in a lot of places, and the formatting, what the writing actually physically looks like in terms of indentation and margins and how you're using references and citations and stuff like that. That's what we're focusing on in this video, is parts of the formatting. We'll touch a little bit on style too, but we're not really going to get to content because that's what you're coming up with as far as the research projects that you're getting started with this week. So to start out, I just want to show you a few APA references, or rather, a few references that violate APA formatting that you can try to work through and correct. So having a little bit of familiarity with this is useful. Looking at your book a bit has some examples near the back, or looking online just through different APA resources like the Purdue Online Writing Lab, things like that. Or even if you happen to have an APA style guide yourself, you could look there. But if you even don't have any of those things, this should give you at least a bit of a foundation to notice some of the common errors in APA cited references. So this first one that I have up here has a number of things wrong with it. So pause if you'd like and take a minute and try to correct those problems, and we will fix them in a second. Okay, I'm going to tell you the things that are wrong with this reference. One big thing that people tend to miss, especially early on, is not indenting. The first line should be flush with the left margin, but the rest of the line should be indented a half an inch, like so. The initials should be the only information you have for first names of authors, so Robert is incorrect up here. The other big thing is that the DOI is not properly formatted here. That instead of putting this number like you used to do even a year ago, they changed the rules in October, you used to just have this kind of string of numbers. Now you are supposed to include the actual URL that someone could just click on and go to that paper. So you do the full URL that is always going to have this web address in the middle. And then the last thing that's different between these two is that this one incorrectly has the word and spelled out, and you're supposed to use an ampersand in the reference section. Otherwise, everything here is right. The article name only has the first word capitalized. If you had a subtitle, you'd capitalize the beginning of that subtitle too, but you don't capitalize every single word in the article title. You do for the journal title, and you capitalize those while italicizing the whole thing. You italicize the volume number here. You include the page numbers that the article goes over. And so all these components that are here are actually right. They're just a few things that are done wrong with them. Okay, next one. Take a look at this one. Try to note some things that are incorrect, and I will review them in just a second. All right, so things that are wrong with this one. The big thing I noticed first, the DOI again is not in the right format. It should be in this URL type format. Another one you might notice is that the article title up here is all capitalized. It should just be the title and the subtitle, so the M and the C here. One really common mistake is that people include this issue number, and that actually, there's one very specific instance that's necessary that I'm not even going to explain because it never happens. But just as a rule of thumb, don't use that issue number. So just the volume number by itself is sufficient there. Okay. And another one that I accidentally put the animation in there wrong, so you can already see the answer, but I'll just go over this one. If you want to pause and just take a look at the top or look at the differences, that's fine. But for this one, the big issue is that we're totally missing the volume number in the first one. That 14 is missing at the top. The ampersand is also missing in the top. You have it down here. And you don't have a DOI or anything at all. But you'll notice this one at the bottom also doesn't have a DOI. If there is no DOI for an article, which does happen sometimes, then you just include the URL which you downloaded the article from, the publisher's URL. It used to be a little more complicated. You'd write retrieve from and then say something about the database you're in, but now you just use the URL. Okay, so that is all these things I just went over. These three things are the references that would appear at the very end of your paper. But you also need to use APA formatting to cite references within your paper, so in the actual text of your paper. So for in-text citations, you just talk as though, you know, the author generally is the subject of your sentence. You say Smith, then you include the year in parentheses. Smith stated, then you go on to say, you know, Smith stated that childhood obesity was related to diabetes later in life, or something like that. You know, they would have some statement based on their research, or you would say Smith conducted a study, yada, yada, yada. If you have two authors, it's the same. You just say Smith and Jones, 2007, conducted an experiment, stated whatever they stated. And the format doesn't really change here. You one author, say their name, two authors, say both of their names. If you want to, if it somehow is awkward to include the names of the authors in your citation, or in your sentence rather, you can use what's called a parenthetical citation. So you could say, psychology majors perform better than chemistry majors, and then in parentheses cite Smith 2005. Or it might be Smith ampersand, that and symbol, Smith ampersand Jones 2007, to cite this way. I find it useful to try to focus on these types of citations where you're incorporating the author's names into the sentence as the subject of the sentence, but sometimes just for the flow of what you're talking about, maybe you're just talking about a fact instead of talking about the authors, so you would use this sort of parenthetical way of doing it. Oh, and I did have another example here for Smith and Jones, sorry. A new rule for the 7th edition of the APA guide, I won't confuse anybody by talking about the rules from the 6th edition, but things are different when you have 3 or more authors. As soon as you have 3 or more authors in your text, you are going to replace the names of all but the first one with some a phrase et al, which you know, is a Latin phrase meaning like and the rest, basically. So Smith et al, and there, you'll notice there's a period after the all and nothing after the et. That means Smith and the rest, or Smith and colleagues, or Smith and co-authors. So there might be 3 authors here, there might be 7, there might be 54. It doesn't matter. You use this format if there's 3 or more authors. And for the parenthetical, it's the same. You don't need an ampersand or anything. You just have Smith et al in the beginning of that. And you know, I said I wasn't going to confuse you with this. Ignore that if you feel like it. But it used to be that there was this weird rule in between for certain numbers of authors, but they just simplified it and made it all the same for 3 or more. One thing I'll also mention that I don't think I have later in this presentation is that for your references, you would include in the references every author up to 20, which in psychology you're almost never going to have more than, you know, 5 or 6 authors at most. So that for medical papers and stuff like that, it sometimes happens where there's dozens and dozens of authors, or genetics. But for psychology, you're generally going to be fine. Just list all the authors and the references, and you'll be in good shape. Other things to keep in mind: when you are writing about a paper, you need to cite it immediately once you start talking about it. Once you are citing an idea or a method or a claim that comes from a paper, you should have an in-text citation in that first sentence generally, unless you're kind of doing some fancy word work to set up citing it in maybe like the second sentence, but you do it very early. Every time you use your author's names, you're going to include the year, except if you're talking about them like in the same paragraph. So if you have an article by Smith from 2005 and you cite Smith 2005 first time and you continue talking about it for several sentences in a row, then you can just say Smith without repeating the 2005. But as soon as you say anything about another study and then you go back to Smith, then you need to say Smith 2005 to make sure you're being very specific about which paper you're talking about. I also think it's nice to vary using et al. You don't necessarily say et al. Every time. You might say the authors or the researchers or Smith and co-authors or something like that. And that is stylistically acceptable, just as et al. Is. One thing that people very often have a problem with in learning about this scientific writing is learning how to paraphrase things. So unless there's basically a definition that you are using in a very specific way, there's not really a need to directly quote another paper. You should be paraphrasing it and putting it in your own words in order to kind of show that you have a handle on what they are actually talking about and claiming. So paraphrase, and then you can just cite normally and avoid these direct quotations. But if you do have to do a direct quotation because you need a definition that somebody provided that's very useful, then you need to include page numbers in your citations. So if on the 64th page of Smith 2005's paper, they use a very important definition, then you put that in quotes, and then you'd say in parentheses, Smith 2005, PP, or I guess just P because you have one page, P dot space 64 for page 64. So if you do quote, you need page numbers, but you should try to avoid quotes in the first place. Okay, so those are the reference and in-text citation exercises. I do have some general writing and citation exercises that I'm not going to go through and explain every single thing that's wrong, because these are just a little bit more in-depth, and I don't think it lends itself particularly well to doing a whole video about. So I will put these up. I'll put the slides up on Canvas and you will be able to work through them. But it's things like this where you have a kind of awkwardly written paragraph that maybe has some incorrect things with in-text citations. So there might be both stylistic and formatting things you can fix in here. You can remove awkward writing. You can make it more scientific. You can make it less wordy. You can fix the double citation problem that's in there. You can remove unnecessary information. And really just streamline these things. So the format of these will be that there is an example, there is a list of problems, and there is a reworded version that's going to be better. So you might want to stop here and look through all of these. And now that I say you might want to stop here, I realize you don't have a choice because the video is going to stop anyway. So anyway, go to Canvas, do these exercises if you'd like a little more practice thinking about scientific writing and style and formatting. And let me know if you have any questions, and don't be ashamed of questions because this stuff can be a bit complicated and is kind of alien the first time you're hearing about it. All right.